right here. 31 loved ones decomposing. This was a year ago. This is Lakeford Funeral Home. This is in Jeffersonville, Indiana. A hop, skip, and a jump from my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. It's a shame. I talked the other day. It's like, how does it get to this? How does it get to this point of tending to someone, something happening, and then the snowball effect that then ensues? I don't know. But the story goes, and this is a generalized story, as I made it a point to not, I won't say not follow it, but it's disheartening, right? So in Indiana, just 10 minutes from Jeffersonville, Indiana, like pretty much this funeral home had 31 decomposing loved ones. And the police were called because, this is like a year ago, by the way, the smell, the odor. There were residents close by. The air conditioner for the funeral home itself was no longer turned on. And obviously the decomposition smell was just over the top. I don't know why it happened. I do know that families would be calling the funeral home owner and they would be dodging the calls and they'd be saying this loved one's not ready yet, but there were loved ones, 31, that were to be tended to and cared for. And there are so many stories, sob stories, sad stories, terrible stories of funeral professionals somehow way allowing the snowball to get to where there was a case of 339. I believe that's what my friend Carrie was talking about. She's in Michigan, a funeral professional, and there were 339 loved ones in a funeral home in Georgia that, like, over the course of, they weren't cremating them. And then in Jacksonville, Florida, in the 80s, they were digging up bodies that they were putting multiple in the same basket. Just absurd shit. It's not profession as a whole, but those are the stories that seem to get all of you viewers to be watching, which is absurd. Not because you're watching, but it's absurd that this all happens. I think it's the whole train wreck mentality. We can't turn away. I would love to understand why. So the way that all of this even happens, I'll just the transparent, simple story is, at the time of a loved one's death, let's say it's at the hospital, Mr. Smith's 90 years old, we receive that loved one into our care. If there's not a prearrangement, then we would have to, let's say it was 2 in the morning, and we didn't talk to the family at the time, we would wait until 8 in the morning to speak to Mrs. Smith and say, hey, our sympathies are low. Under the circumstances, we simply want to schedule a time for you to come in to finalize your services for Mr. Smith. And just so we have an idea to better prepare, is it your wish for there to be visitation, or where Mr. Smith is present, or cremation? If embalming was requested, then we would get permission to embalm. So after 8 a.m., there would be embalming. Then the arrangements would happen. There'd be an exchange, right, of monetary value. And then from there, the funeral professionals, the embalmers, the funeral directors would finalize dressing, casketing, getting memorial folders, getting all the printed materials, sending stuff to the paper, and then having the loved one in their casket, the time and date that was requested by Mrs. Smith. And then from there, go to the cemetery. Okay, let's say that they're going to be cremated. Mr. Smith's family wants cremation. Well, there's a transfer, like I'm going to give you this money, or I'm going to give you this paperwork that shows that proceeds will be, from this insurance policy, will be assigned to the funeral expense. And then from there, the paperwork goes to the coroner for signature for cremation. And then once signed off on, it's completed. And then Mrs. Smith receives her loved one. I don't know how a funeral a professional could allow a week or 5 days or 4 days, or obviously there are special circumstances, but I'm saying, like, after the cremation takes place or even beginning the paperwork, how could you even wait? And then once you're complete, you just, I don't know. Maybe the people weren't paying up front. Maybe the funeral professionals, the funeral home wasn't asking for the funds up front. Maybe all the bills and expenses, because it is a for-profit operation. And that's not an excuse. I'm just trying to get into the psyche of these people. The stress right? If you have 31 families that are calling and saying, "Hey, where's my loved one? What's the status of my loved one? Can you help me with my loved one?" Like, what the hell, you know? So that's how it works in the sense of just like an ABCD. It's pretty cut and dry, and I don't know. I don't know. There was a crematory in Arizona who they had these two old. Do you all remember in the Astro Chevrolet Astro vans? There was a maroon one and there was a white one. They sat outside this crematory, this cremation service, and one van had five loved ones, crematory like cremation container on top of each other. Had four, and they sat overnight, and news crew staked out all night long and were filming to see if anyone would come in the vans, offload the loved ones. There was not appropriate shelving. You can have a van that has adequate two, like, what am I trying to say? Like 2 stories, and they're not touching containers. And people will say, well, it shouldn't matter. Well, it does matter. And so the next morning they go and like, what the hell are you? Oh, I don't have the space. Well, you don't need to take the call. That that's the discipline right there. Like if you cannot facilitate because you are, overwhelmed with cremation, and then the crematory was constantly putting out black smoke. There's nothing wrong with that, mind you. In the event, you have your large obese cases, sometimes black smoke comes out. Sometimes if you're cremating a casket, an actual full casket with a loved one, then that can produce a lot of smoke. It depends on, nonetheless, one seemed to perpetually. So that means that either the machine couldn't keep up, the retort was only a retort that could cremate, let's, for instance, 5 to 7 loved ones, are overworking it. And I feel like we were doing that with COVID, but anyway, it was just a shit business to begin with, and they didn't have the business being in business because they should be able to say, hey, I can't facilitate and care these families, but I am going to, whether it's talk to a therapist or something, I want to learn with why, like why did it get to that point for so many of these professionals? It's interesting as you're dealing with grief and you're dealing with families, the deceased loved ones can't speak. And then there was another instance where there was an individual who was taking photos of the loved ones for humor purposes. So it was a licensed embalmer that has since had their license pulled and revoked. I forget the date. But they were taking pictures and were showing them their friends, showing the photos. Now, there are large funeral providers that they serve so many loved ones and their families that it is important. Let's say you come in and there's some swelling or trauma, and families have a request for a full service, and they come in, they're like, why does my loved one look that way? There are special circumstances where bigger firms will take a before and after photo, specifically if they're swelling. It's all like, I don't want to say HIPAA because HIPAA is for the living and hospital related, healthcare related, but it's very much a secure environment. These photos are housed so that in the event a family had question, you could say, may I show you a photograph to show you how your loved one entered into our care? So there was this opportunity to have accountability, but also to maybe share the story respectfully, to say, hey, this is why they're swollen. But this individual wasn't doing that. They were taking photographs, their personal phone, to then take out to their friends and, hey, look what I dealt with. That's not. And also these are non-professional, like non-funeral director, right? Like even there's an argument if you have a master embalmer who has dealt with decapitation, and they were able to not only have the loved one put back together, but to have them shown during a visitation. Like there would be some educational type controlled content. I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm rambling, but the point is It only takes a few bad apples to ruin the bunch. I have not followed up with this 31 decomposing body funeral home in a little bit. It was, I mean, it was so close to me. I mean, it's like an hour away from me. And I was like, damn. And the crazy thing about it, the year before this funeral home, there's what's called like trade work. So if you own a funeral home and you are in California and you have a family there that calls you and says, hey, my mom died, but she's in Kentucky, California funeral home would call this funeral home and say, hey, can you help with receiving the loved one and embalming and prepare for shipping out? Follow me? So that funeral home a year before all this happened, called there, and they called our funeral home to handle the transfer and the cremation. And then we sent the cremated remains back to them. Everything was above board. Everything was absolutely above board. But nonetheless, there was only one professional interaction with that funeral home. And it's wild. It's wild. So there are other instances where, like the mausoleum that is in Pennsylvania, the man that sold the mausoleum to a family who thought they were buying a house. I don't know that, like, I don't know how that happened, but apparently, allegedly, it's still in the courts, and it does make sense that they thought that was the case. A cemetery has to have what's called a perpetual care. So in the state of Kentucky, to start a cemetery, you have to have $75,000 perpetual care fund. That is the fund that exists to pay for mowing, pay for the upkeep of the property. Well, this one, those funds were stolen because the owner at the time was in poor health. Somebody stole it. I don't know how that happened, but you have this mausoleum filled with bodies still, loved, and because the air conditioning and the heating and air is not circulated, you have the mausoleum itself, it's leaking the fluid, and yeah, it's a disaster. It's a shit show. So you have a mausoleum space is like $5,000, 5 to 6, 7. I mean, that's expensive depending on the city and state you live in. So these families had to pay for another mausoleum at another cemetery for probably the fee to get them from one mausoleum to the new mausoleum. And there's nothing they can really do about it. I'm sure there's tons and tons of lawsuits, but the video that I had seen of all these overgrown graves for the people that had ground burial, it's just disheartening. It's sad. I mean, it's really sad. And all these stories, by the way, don't in any way to write songs. They don't at all. Speaking of, it's interesting because I've talked to so many exciting things happening in the music, and if you have never heard of musicians, spent 13 years in the funeral profession, all of my songs, well, many of them are inspired by my works, but the music video, like the music video world, if you all remember, what is it? MTV had the show, what was that show? But it was like behind the scenes of making a music video, and it's been millions of dollars. And now just iPhone and a light in the kitchen, for instance. And content is king. It's amazing that the content that we put out is what's getting all of you all to go and stream all the music. And I'm excited for the single to go to radio January 8th and the single to release January 12th. And all that to say, I shot a video yesterday on my iPhone. It's funny because before that, like a few months ago, which we haven't been able to release it because of everything that's happened from all the exciting stuff. We haven't been able to release it yet, but we spent tons of money on the music video for a song called Close Like Me. And shot it in a studio in Nashville, a lot of green screen, a lot of visual effects, and it's amazing because I shot a music video in the backyard of a house and use the sun as the light, and I've been editing it. It's done just like that. It saved thousands of dollars. It's funny because you all want content. You all want to be educated, which we do with these videos, and then you all want content, and it's just, this is what you all do nonstop. You meaning me too, right? I mean, it's constant. It's just like this. And if you can catch them, it's great. But it takes you 7 times to hear that, hey, My stuff's streaming. Go listen to it. Hey guys, go listen to my music. It'll take you 7 times, 7 different videos or pieces of content before you go and do it if you've never heard of me. And that's interesting. So getting into the psyche of, I'm always wanting to know why. Yeah. And then making you all content that you all believe in, and it's not selfish content, it's actually thinking about you. Like this video, like you all wondering about the 31 loved ones. And then the 189 or 91, I can't remember the number in Colorado, but that's not the first time in Colorado they got in trouble. Not that funeral home that had the 189 or 91 loved ones, but even before that, you had a mother and daughter were harvesting body parts, torsos, heads. They should have been cremating. And then you have, it's nonstop what you hear and experience. You're like, damn, that would never happen. And then it happens and it gets closer and closer. But I just know that there are incredible people in this profession. And it takes one bad apple, but this profession is filled with incredible, delicious apples. Great apples, good people, kind people, compassionate people. And I'm mindful of them, especially right now. Like I'm getting ready to go to a Christmas dinner. And this is the first year in 13 that I'm not on call. And yet all these people that paved the way for funeral service, all the people that are still on call, they can't go to a dinner, they can't have a drink, they can't, because they might get called out. And if they go to dinner, they will get called out. Zip it. Come here. I don't know why the dog did that. Nonetheless, it's about making choices, great choices, good choices, being intentional, being professional, being kind and compassionate, and thinking about other people, because that's what this life is about. It's about you. It's not about me. And being forthcoming, being educational, being intentional, it's important and it matters. So be mindful of all those who are without, and there are great people that are available to you and yours at this very moment. And there are people that are grieving. So if you start a funeral home, don't not do your job. Always do your job. Always do your job. That's all I have to say about that. I've been in these crazy rabbit holes because I want to be educated on a bunch of stuff. It's always been happening. It's always going to happen where people do stupid, shitty things. So don't be one of those people that do stupid, shitty things on the grand scale. Obviously, we're all going to make mistakes, but not tending to 31 loved ones is a huge mistake, a grave mistake. Yeah. I just looked down. You went to a funeral today, and there was a funeral director that was amazing. That's great. There are so many incredible directors that work very, very hard and work tirelessly to take care of, and then Beverly, I saw what happens if a body has been years later, like they found a loved one. They would try to make sure who that loved one was, whether if they had record, if they didn't, they would have to send them to the medical examiner's office, and then they would then be identified and buried accordingly. They'd be the family would be notified. It's just a shame that that's happened before too, where families thought that they buried their loved one and they didn't. Or there were instances where families thought that their loved one was placed in a casket that they purchased, but the funeral home, they just buried the loved one. And I don't know how they got away with not burying the casket, but they reused the casket. Excuse me, I had the hiccups. Is that the loved one who, are you talking about the murderer? Like the one that killed quite a few people, the old lady that they did the Netflix show about? Like the murder next door? That would be medical examiners, coroners, and people working tirelessly. The law enforcement agencies would be working to do that. But, that's why it's important to educate yourself, call on the funeral homes that are close to you in close proximity. Like, why do you want what you want? Meaning, do you want burial or cremation? What is your driving force for either? If it's monetary, then you need to compare pricing. You need to contact all of your providers. And that way you're able to get a good idea and handle on how they operate, because that's important too. Because every funeral home, if they are in their smaller communities that I've always operated in, you're going to be pretty comparable in price, and the level of care is superior everywhere you go, right? So then it comes down to where do you feel that you are connecting? Who do you feel that you connect with? Which building do you like the most? Have you been to a funeral there? Or if you live in a bigger city and you have so many options, do you want like a cremation society because price is of importance and you want cremation and you need to be conscientious? Well, it's important for you to educate. So keep that in mind. And educated people make educated decisions. And this profession is wanting so badly for you to, one, see how incredible it is, two, feel loved, and three, learn why we do what we do, so that you're able to, make the appropriate decisions for your family, for you, because up until COVID, it was this voluntary thing for us to die. It's like, oh, I don't know. But now we're having these conversations. Nonetheless, I hope that this finds you well. I hope you're doing whatever day it is. I don't have a clue. 2005. Well, blessings to you. And I know this holiday is a reminder of possibly what is not. And my hope is, Beverly, you experience joy in what is. And may you be blessed with fond memories and love, and everyone who stumbles upon this. And I am thinking of you all. I hope you all have an incredible night. And just know that choose good, and it matters. You showing up for others.